Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We are going to continue to read the book al-Ajwoba الجلية في الأحكام الحنبلية, or the clear answer of Hanbali Rulings by Sheikh Musa bin Issa al-Qaddoomi rahimahullah. This is lesson number 28, so let us begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna bima yanfa'una wa zidna ilman ya Rabbil Alameen. This is lesson number 28, and we are going to be discussing the invalidators of the prayer. And as always, we're reading from the translation of a Sheikh Khalid Shah. قال المؤلف رحمه الله نفع الله به وبعلومه وعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. Number 62. What are the invalidators of salah or prayer? And the author replies, Salat is invalidated by A, everything that invalidates tahara or purification. So these are 8 things, and you may refer to our earlier dars. I believe this is dars number 11, where we have discussed those 8 things in detail. And the author continues, B, exposing awra intentionally. So the key word here is intentionally, and At-Taghlibi will give us some more details on this, where he, rahimahullah, says that if one does it intentionally, and even what is shown is only a small amount, that would still be something that would invalidate the prayer. However, if it was not done intentionally, for example, if there's a wind that was maybe blowing the clothes and something exposed, that would not invalidate the prayer if whatever was exposed was something that was not a lot. Not a lot isn't the best word here. I don't think you can translate the meaning of what he's saying in Arabic, yasir, with one word in English, but I think the way that the matan and the sharh will go on to explain it will be clearer. So basically, little is something that if one sees it, it is not going to cause some type of a disgust or revulsion according to what would be common among the people. And he gives the example of, for example, if the genitalia were exposed by whatever unintentional reason, like the wind, then this would be something that is considered more excessive and not minimal, and Allah knows best. But this is going back to urf, or the tradition of the people, and At-Taghlibi does mention that what is disgusting or repulsive, it is different between the people, the one who is seeing this thing. So there is some way to understand this within the urf, but still some things like the genitalia would be considered something that is more than a little or minimal of the awra, and Allah knows best. And the author goes on, B, exposing the awra intentionally. C, turning one's back to the qibla when one is able to face it. And we have discussed this issue both, if you remember the lesson where we discussed the shurut, or the conditions of the prayer, as well as in the previous dars where we talked about the disliked things in the prayer. So not facing the prayer, or the qibla, but not having your back to it would be, as we previously discussed, you're still in the general direction of the qibla, but your back is not to it. But when your back actually goes toward the qibla, then you have invalidated the prayer, as facing the qibla is one of the conditions of the prayer. And the author goes on, D. Coming in contact with najasa that is inexcusable for one doing salat if it is not removed immediately. So there could be certain instances where it may be excusable to pray with najasa on you, but those are quite probably limited scenarios. But maybe the point to focus on, and this is going to be more applicable, I think, to us in our everyday lives, is that if for some reason some najasa gets on you, you have to remove it immediately. As long as you can remove it completely and do that quickly, then the prayer will be valid. And the author goes on, E. Customarily excessive movements, not part of salat other than salat al-khawf. Now this probably needs some explanation, so we can look at, for example, Taghlibi's sharh of Dalil al-Talib, where he mentions several examples of such movements that would invalidate the prayer, including opening a door, walking, tying the amama or headdress, writing, sewing, and it doesn't matter if this is done intentionally, out of forgetfulness, or out of ignorance. And the reasoning that he says is because this is breaking up the order of the pillars of the prayer. Of course, these movements, as we said, are conditioned by necessity. So in the case that it was something that's required to do, then that could be excused. And he gives the example of if there is fear or running away from an enemy or some type of a wild beast. In that case, it would not invalidate the prayer. Now, if we also look at the Sharh al-Manar of Dalil al-Talib, there is a good point here that we can reflect on what Taghlibi said. He mentioned about opening the door. But Shaykh al-Dawayan, rahimahullah, he does mention the hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam opened the door for Aisha radiallahu anha, and he was in prayer. فتح الباب لعائشة وهو في الصلاة. Now, these seem to be kind of like contradictory points here, but what we can understand is that Ad-Dawayan, rahimahullah, he did mention that things that are not a lot of movement. So we can understand, because he's categorized the hadith under that, it's understood that opening the door was a minor movement. And we know that the house of Rasulullah ﷺ was quite small, so we can imagine probably he was just in front of the door ﷺ, and he opened the door. Whereas the example that Taghlibi gave, we can maybe imagine like a bigger house or a bigger room where someone would have to walk to then open the door, and Allah knows best. And a good thing to concentrate on here is that in this point, Qaddoomi does say, other than the prayer of fear. So, of course, in this prayer, many things that would not normally be accepted are accepted, and such movements in that prayer would be excused. And the author goes on, F, leaning by someone who is fit without necessity. So, of course, standing is from the pillars of the prayer. It is something fard that must be done. And it says in Dalil al-Talib, what it means by standing is being straight or erect. And if one were to be standing bowed or bent over or tilted or leaning to the extent that it would not be called standing, and this is done without an excuse, then the prayer would not be valid. However, if one did have his head kind of leaning down, but the rest of his body was straight, that would not invalidate the prayer. And the author goes on, G, going back to the first tashahhud by a knowledgeable person who was fully aware after starting qira'ah, or the recitation of al-Fatiha in the next rak'ah. So now we're getting into some very specific points of fiqh. So he's talking about a person who is knowledgeable, in Arabic aliman, which means someone who's not ignorant of the prohibition, and also dhakiran, or someone who's not forgetting about that. So for this to invalidate the prayer, one would have to have those two conditions: being knowledgeable of its prohibition and remembering it. However, Shaykhuna Dr. Mustafa Ulyan, Hafadhullah, he did mention and clarify that it is permissible to return to that before standing upright if you need to. And just to be clear here, we are talking about a scenario where like someone is praying and they've forgotten the tashahhud. When we say go back to it, we're not just saying that at any time just you go back and want to do an extra tashahhud. No, the scenario is that you've forgotten about it, and then while you're moving to the next movement, you've remembered that, or even after beginning the next rak'ah, you've remembered it. So you can only go back to complete it if you're not standing upright. And the author goes on, H, intentionally doing an extra rukn action. I think that's self-explanatory. Anything extra that you do intentionally would then invalidate the prayer. And he goes on, I, intentionally doing some rukn actions before others. So this would be like doing the sujood before the ruku'. And obviously, if you're doing that, you are taking your actions out of order, and this is against the arkan of the prayer. And the author goes on, J, intentionally doing salam before completing the salat or prayer. And this is basically just following the point that we've already said. The problem here is that this is the final action of the prayer, so it's like you're finishing the prayer prematurely. And the author goes on, K, intentionally reciting in a manner that changes the meaning, meaning the meaning of the recitation. And At-Taghlibi gives some examples of this. So he says, for example, and we're talking about reading al-Fatiha, if that's not clear, but instead of saying ihdina, one says ahdina. So instead of the the imperative order, guide us, you are saying, I guide us. Likewise, if one were to use a dhamma at the end of an'amta, so instead of saying that you've blessed, it would be that I blessed. So this is changing the meaning in a way that's not acceptable. And the author goes on, L, sutra placed far while one is naked. Maybe this isn't sounding like such a common scenario, but this is the ruling. If one had to pray naked, he should have a sutra that's close to him. And this idea of it being far away is also going to the urf or common practice understanding, but he gives an example like, if it would require like a lot of movement to get to it, like you'd have to walk to it, that would be considered far. And Allah knows best. This is what At-Taghlibi has said, and Duwayyan, he says a similar thing in Al-Manar. The author goes on, M, annulling one's intention. And I think this is obvious. If you stop your intention that you're praying, of course the prayer is conditioned by the intention, so then you no longer have the conditions of the prayer. And the author goes on, N, intending to break one's intention. Now I'm reading from the translation here, but I think the more correct word in English is indecision. Indecision to break one's intention, because the Arabic is a taraddud, so that's kind of like, you're caught between two positions. And having that indecision is like you're partially already have annulled, because you're not firmly on the intention to pray. And Allah knows best. And the author goes on, O, acting with doubt in an intention. I don't think that is the best way to translate it. But to give you an example of what that would be, Shaykhana Dr. Mustafa, he gave this example of like, if one is in the prayer and then he's thinking to himself, I'll leave the prayer after Al-Fatiha. So although you technically still have the intention that you're in the prayer, because you have that intention to break the prayer, then the prayer would also be becoming invalid. And the author goes on, P, wavering in intention. Also, I don't like this translation that much, but the Arabic talks about shak fi niyah, so having some kind of a doubt in the intention. And the Taghlibi, rahimahullah, he mentions that this would be while one is in the prayer. And this would be different in the specific scenario that one was having a doubt during the Takbirat al-Ihram, because at that point you can still be making the intention, so then you can still make the correct intention and continue with the prayer. But once you've actually commenced the prayer and you're in the prayer, you can't have any shak or doubt on the intention. And he goes on, Q, dua or supplication for desires of the world. However, regarding these worldly desires, Shaykhana Dr. Mustafa, hafadhullah, he did mention that it would be permissible to, for example, request a beautiful house. However, it would not be permissible to request some of the silly things. So, beautiful house in a general terms is no problem. Saying I'd like to have a gold house or a gold toilet, then this would be something that would be not permissible. And the author goes on, R, using the kaf or the second person, parentheses in Arabic, to other than Allah Ta'ala or His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So without going into a long explanation about Arabic, but I think inshallah most of you are familiar that the kaf is used as a pronoun. So if you're intending by this kaf, which would mean like you in English, to mean other than Allah or His Messenger, according to wherever it is in what you're reading, then this would be problematic because you would not be addressing the correct person. And this is just like changing the meaning as we've previously discussed. And then the author goes on, S, laughing loudly. When I look at the Arabic, I don't actually see the word loudly, and I did not see such an explanation in either At-Taghlabi Sharh or in Manar al-Sabil. Maybe the Mashaykh who are listening can write if there are any comments otherwise, but I don't think that loudly is the correct translation, meaning I don't believe that loudly is a condition regarding the idea that laughing does break the prayer. Dawayan mentions in al-Manar the hadith of Jabir, al-Qahqahatu tanqas salatu wala tanqas al-wudu. So laughing invalidates prayer but does not invalidate wudu, and this is related by ad-Darqutni. And he also mentions that Ibn Mundhir mentions that there is consensus that laughing invalidates the prayer. However, laughing is different than smiling, and Ibn Qudama rahimahullah mentions in al-Mughni that most of the people of knowledge they have the opinion that smiling does not break the prayer, and Allah knows best. And the author goes on, T, speaking even forgetfully. And here we have another useful word, forgetfully. You may notice a lot of these rulings that we're mentioning, they're having different conditions. Some are excusing things that are done forgetfully, others are not. In this case, speaking, if done forgetfully, is not excused. And Ad-Dawayan mentions in his sharh the hadith فَأَمَرْنَا بِالسُّكُوتِ وَنَهَيْنَا عَنِ الْكَلَامِ. So we were ordered to be quiet and prohibited to talk. And this is narrated by the Jama'ah, or several of the hadith collectors, on the authority of Zayd bin Arqam. And the Taghlabi, he also mentions that when we say forgetfully, this is referring to both the imam and the follower, and it is also referring to it being done intentionally or out of ignorance, and the words being obedient or good words as opposed to disliked words. And this likewise applies to the fard or obligatory and nafil or supererogatory prayers. And the author goes on, you, follower going in front of the imam. And going in front means literally going in front of him. However, At-Taghlabi, he explains that it would be excused, and we wouldn't even say excused, it wouldn't have any effect if the one who's praying behind the imam, meaning he's being led by the imam, if he is physically standing behind the imam, then it wouldn't matter if, for example, that person was taller than the imam And like when he was making sujood, his head would be beyond the head of the imam, because his standing would actually be originally behind the imam. So the important point is that the standing cannot be in front of the imam. The author goes on, the imam invalidating his salat or his prayer. This is obvious. If the one leading you is invalidating his prayer, then your prayer is also going to be invalidated. And the author goes on, W, performing salam before the imam intentionally or forgetfully and does not repeat it afterwards, i.e. after the imam's salam. So once again, specific ruling here, doesn't matter if this was done intentionally or forgetfully, it would invalidate the prayer. And when it says he wouldn't repeat it, it means that like you've already now done the salam before the imam, so your prayer is invalidated. So when the imam himself does the salam, you wouldn't then also do the salam again, because you're already out of the prayer. And the author concludes, X, eating, and Y, drinking, except what is customarily considered to be a small amount or a large amount out of ignorance. Now, Qaddoomi, seems like he's put them as two separate points, but it seems that the way it's explained in the shuruh or the explanations, that they are the same point, so I would just put it together as one point. And Ibn al-Mundir, he mentions a consensus that if one were to eat or drink during the obligatory prayer intentionally, that would require one to make up the prayer, i.e. invalidate the prayer. So the author has also mentioned that this is conditioned to be done out of ignorance, and it's clarified in Al-Manar, where the author says it would be excused if it was done out of forgetfulness, and then one would just do the sujood, the prostration of forgetfulness, and that is what is mentioned in Al-Kafi. Now this ruling is actually applying to the fard or obligatory prayer, although the Matin doesn't say this directly, but we can understand that from what was mentioned in the Sharh. And also if we look, for example, in Al-Muntaha, that will also become clear, where it's mentioned in Al-Muntaha that a nafil or supererogatory prayer would not be invalidated if one were to drink a small amount intentionally. And this is quoted from Al-Imam Ahmed, and it's also narrated that Ibn Zubair radiyallahu anhu would be drinking during the supererogatory prayers, and Shaykhana Dr. Mustafa Hafadullah, he mentioned what some of his shiyukh from Al-Arabiya have mentioned, that some of the shiyukh of Najd, they would be drinking during the Taraweeh. So it seems that even our ancestors, they've acted upon this ruling, and Allah knows best. And the author is going to conclude this section with a few things that do not break the prayer. So he says, however, salat does not break if one A, swallows without chewing what is stuck in one's teeth. So just swallowing something that's already in your mouth and that's small would not be considered eating, as opposed to something that then you're chewing and then you swallow. And the author continues, B, falls asleep for a small duration and speaks therein or during qira'ah, meaning a recitation, and utters something else. And the Shaykhna Dr. Mustafa, he mentioned here that this sleep refers to a sleep where one is standing up. So if somehow one fell down and was laying down, then this would invalidate the prayer. And finally, C is overcome by sneezing, yawning, or crying and utters two letters. And there is something here that is missing in the translation, sa'al, which means kind of like having the phlegm in the throat. So if you're overcome by having this phlegm or mucus in the throat, or sneezing or yawning or crying, these would not invalidate the prayer. So we have now completed this section on the invalidators of the prayer. Inshallah, next dars we'll be looking at the Salat al-Jama'ah, or the congregational prayer. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.